Once again the old song.
Autumn came that year altogether too soon for the Lisa household. The children did not like to think their days on the pasture were coming to an end, that two of them would soon be living far away in a great city, another go up into the mountains, while Stephanie would stay behind, a sad and lonely little girl. "No, I don't want to live alone," said Stephanie with determination when they were discussing the sad outlook on one of their last days together.
"I shall write a letter and send it to Cousin Lorenz. He promised me something." "Vincy will come home," suggested Alida, "and then you will have good company."
That same day Vincenz Lisa said to his wife, "I only hope Lorenz will not take his boy away from me. It has been such a bountiful years, there is much to do. I can't get along without the boy, for I cannot see everything that must be done. He has a good memory, and displays as much thought and care as three. He shows as much interest and pleasure in the farm as though he owned it.
Ah, if he were mine!
I would give half my wealth for such a son."
"Let us be happy that he is still with us," rejoined his wife.
"Perhaps we can keep him for quite a while. Good cousin Lorenz has sent us no warning yet." Mr. Delric wrote regularly, and a letter had recently come containing the usual good news. Vincy was well and everything was going along all right. Mr. Delric seemed in no hurry to write about Vincy's return, though the year of his absence was near its end. A few days later, as the children entered the room one evening, a thick envelope lay on the table.
"That is a letter from father to Mr. Lisa," exclaimed Alida as she glanced at the handwriting.
"Now it's all over," said Hugo. "You'll find we have to go, Alida." The children were all alarmed, but even though they talked about their departure, none of them thought it was actually near at hand. Even Jos, to whom the news was told the moment he came in, made great eyes. He had not quite conceived that their happiness must end, for he and Hugo had drawn close in a warm friendship. When Mr. Lisa came in, he took up the letter only to lay it aside, for he read letters only when there was nothing else to do, and now supper was ready. When Mrs. Lisa had brought the food to the table and had attended to everything, she said she would like to open the letter. She knew the children were eager to know what their father had written, and they had recognized his handwriting. He consented, and she read the letter to herself, then said she would tell them all about it next day. There was all sorts of information in it, but the main news was that Mr. Thorneau would arrive in a few days to take his children home.
Absolute silence followed this announcement.
Then, one after the other, the children left the table and gathered under the great walnut tree in front of the house. With the old tree as their witness, they solemnly promised to do all within their power to spend the next summer together. When they were all fast asleep in their beds and Vincenz Lisa had lit his evening pipe, his wife sat down beside him, saying she wanted to read the letter aloud. Mr. Thorneau wrote from Dresden, where he had gone to visit Mr. Delric, who had asked him to accompany him on a trip to Switzerland. He thought information by word of mouth concerning Vincy would be more than welcome to the parents, and he would bring it. However, his time in Luc would be very short. He could not arrive before Sunday evening and must be on his way early Monday morning. Now it would be ever so much pleasanter if they could spend Sunday together in Freiburg. That was Mr. Lisa's old home, and surely he would be glad to visit it. Wouldn't they bring his children to meet him there, and of course Stephanie would come too. They could reach Freiburg early Sunday afternoon, and he and Mr. Delric would meet them at the train, for they expected to arrive earlier. Vincenz Lisa pondered a while in silence, then asked, "What does he say about our boy?" Mrs. Lisa assured him he had written nothing but what she had read, but Mr. Delric would give them a report in person. "Do you know why he doesn't care to bring him along?" asked her husband further. "We can't know that," she replied. "But we can guess. I can tell you why. Mr. Delric now sees he cannot make him a traveling musician. He is in no hurry to bring him home and tell me frankly he does not know what to do with him, because he had turned his thoughts further away from being a farmer.
Mr. Delrick is a good man, but he miscalculated. Everybody likes to put off as long as possible owning to have made a mistake.
Vinzen's Lisa now blew such dense clouds of smoke that his wife knew it was wise to wait a bit.
Then she said cautiously, "Let us wait until we hear what Mr. Delrick has to say. It will be a blessing to talk with him. What do you think of going to Freiburg?"
"It has not entered my head," he replied curtly.
"You surely do not think I'd make a trip like that without any reason, like a fellow who does not know what to do with his time?"
"No one who knows you could believe that," said his wife.
But Mr. Thorneau would not have settled upon a Sunday without a purpose. He knows you would not come on a weekday.
It was nice of him to invite us. He could have asked anyone to bring the children. He says it would be a favor if we went with them, and I must say, Vinzen's, I've grown to love them dearly, and they are sorry to leave us. They have told me so and have shown me their hearts. I would like to see them safely in their father's hands."
"You can go with them, why not?" he retorted in a perverse tone. "Go with them to Freiburg, you are sufficient escort for them."
"No, Vinzen's, I will not do that," was his wife's decided reply.
"You can see by the letter that Mr. Thorneau wants you to come. You know very well that I could not decide about the boy's future. We will go together or not at all."
The silence which followed was too prolonged for Mrs. Lisa's patience, and she began again, "When we are invited in such a friendly manner, I do not know why we should not make the trip to Freiburg. Don't you remember how delighted we were as children when father and mother drove us there on a Sunday, and how we thought ourselves the luckiest of mortals as we sat in the high carriage between them, traveling off to meet all kinds of adventures?
We should make the trip just for memory's sake.
First of all we went into the church and heard the great organ. You must recollect how your mother delighted in this above everything else.
Wouldn't you take pleasure in going there again?
Besides, it strikes me it would be a good plan for you to use this chance to visit the estate. You have been wanting to see how matters stood there for quite a while, and you are sure to find lots of things to attend to. Now that Joss is with us, you are better able to leave than later on.
It is certainly time you looked into things there. If nothing special takes you, you will not go until something is wrong, and then you will regret the delay." Vinzen's Lisa began thinking the journey might have its good side. With much hesitation and some resentment, he said, "How did you work that all out? I don't see how we could be away so long. It would take 3 days."
"Not for all of us," replied Mrs. Lisa quickly, for she had thought it all out. "We can attend to everything here early Sunday morning and be in Freiburg that afternoon. I will start back that evening with the children so we can be home Monday morning."
"How many children are you expecting to bring back?"
"The stranger children will have gone, and you have only your one left." "Only our two, Joss and Steffeli. I'll bring home no strangers," said his wife appeasingly.
"What?
You want to take Joss too?" he said excitedly.
"Then my going is out of the question.
If Joss isn't home to keep things in order, I'll not take a step away from here, you can reckon on that." Mrs. Lisa patiently explained that for one day, and that Sunday, the farmhand could attend to the stable work, and Joss would be back again Monday morning.
Nothing would be neglected.
"And then think, Vinzen's," she concluded, "Joss has done much for us, and we have never given him the slightest pleasure.
He would certainly enjoy this trip. It is because of him that you have the time to go to your other farm and to put things in order there. You can afford to be away 8 days, for when Joss is with me, I can promise you everything will be done at home." Vinzen's Lisa was a just man and always ready to do what justice called for. After weighing the pros and cons, he was glad of this opportunity to give Joss a well-earned holiday, and said decisively, "Well, we'll make the trip. Tell Joss at once, he will plan everything out that needs to be done while he is away. Tomorrow morning, promised Mrs. Lisa, rejoicing that she could give the good news to all the children, especially to Joss. When she made the happy announcement the next morning, Alida and Stephanie jumped for joy, and Hugo said, "Then everything isn't quite over. It will be much easier to go away when everybody goes with us." Joss could hardly conceive that such pleasure was for him. He would see the city, and much beautiful country on the way. It would be his first journey, for he had never been away from his mountain home until the time he came to Luke. Sunday arrived, and the merry party journeyed off through the green country. The trip was much finer than they had imagined. Alida and Stephanie talked incessantly, and when Hugo was not taking part in the conversation, he was pointing out the interesting things along the way which might otherwise have been unobserved. Joss, on the other hand, was so engrossed with all that was new to him that he gazed about in silence. Thus the hours flew by, and the children jumped up in astonishment when Mr. Lisa said, "Watch out now, we will soon be in Freiburg." A few minutes later there was a call of Freiburg, and the train stopped. Mrs. Lisa peered out of the window, and yes, there stood the gentleman waiting to receive them. She could not help giving a sigh, for she had hoped till this moment that Mr. Delric might bring Vincy along. But he was not there. Alida and Hugo rushed up to their father, and Mr. Thorno took them both in his arms while he responded to their boisterous greetings with happy exclamations. Then he held his son off from him, the better to gaze at him. "Is this really my son Hugo, the little fellow without life and strength? Nut brown as a woodsman. Fat cheeks. Eyes like a deer's. Mrs. Lisa, what have you done with this lad? And is this gypsy girl my Alida? The red blood flushes her brown cheeks, what health! Mrs. Lisa, how did you bring all this about?" "Oh, we know mighty well," the children chorused, and began to relate how they had spent the summer days. After Mr. Delric had greeted Mr. Lisa, he shook the wife's hand, and as though he read what was in her heart, he said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Lisa, everything goes well with the boy. That he is not here is due to no bad reason, believe me. Ah, there is my little friend Stephanie, and another old acquaintance. It's fine to have Joss here, for by now he belongs to your household." "As one of our own," said Mrs. Lisa, putting her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank God we have him. I wish to lay a proposition before you, and want Mr. Lisa's approval above that of all others," began Mr. Delric. "Our friend, Mr. Thorno, has invited us all to dinner, and as the hotel is close by the old St. Nicholas Church, we thought it would be pleasant to go there first." Mrs. Lisa looked at her husband, hoping he would consent, for to go to church would suit her best of all. Old memories crowded Vinzenz Lisa's mind as soon as he trod the streets of Freiburg. Like the child of his neighbor, he had known nothing grander than to drive into Freiburg on Sundays, and, holding his mother's hand, step into the church and listen to the wonderful organ. "If I had anything to say about it, I would like to go to the church first. It is Sunday and it is proper for us to go there," he said. So the party wandered into the city, and to the great old church, where it was so silent, so solemn in the semi-darkness that the children stepped very lightly down the aisle and seated themselves beside the grown-ups without a word. Suddenly the organ began to play, and through the stillness there floated music of such power and beauty that it seemed as if the heavenly choir were singing to call all the world to praise and prayer. Stephanie uttered a suppressed cry of joy, and pulled violently at her mother's sleeve. "Mother, it is Vincy," she exclaimed, greatly excited. The mother had recognized her Vincy at her first glance toward the organ, and the sight of his curly black head had so surprised and agitated her that it took all her power to keep from sobbing aloud. Her husband must know too. She nudged him gently and whispered, "Vinzenz, it is Vincy." He made no reply, nor did he look up, unwilling to show how the music had moved him. And now the music suddenly changed. From low mourning it grew to loud lamentation, as if a great choir of despairing mortals gave voice to their suffering and penitence. Bitter pain, then supplication and fervent, humble prayer for succor and mercy. Suddenly it was as though the heavens opened and angels on high sang of merciful love and everlasting joy. Then above the heavenly choir there arose a voice, clear and powerful, filling the great church with the words. Yes, the holy hymn of grace sounds through all eternity. It was just hearing those well-known notes sounding afresh so powerfully and inspiringly had overcome him, and he could but add his voice to the angelic choir. When the last note died away, perfect silence reigned in the church. Then the two gentlemen rose, and Vinzenz Lisa also got up, wiping his eyes. "You surely don't believe that," he said in a hoarse voice, as his wife followed him, in answer to the words she had whispered to him some time before. "No one can tell me that was our Vincy." Mr. Delric was standing just behind him and said, clapping him on the shoulder, "We will not take anything on faith. Let us climb up to the organ loft and see for ourselves who plays like this."